Welcome to Cutting Edge Web Content Development, a podcast by Butter CMS. Today, we've got Jason Hewett, an SEO consultant at Jason Hewett, LLC. He's going to talk about how to work with an SEO agency. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, I'm really excited about this because I've worked with a lot of different agencies over the years for SEO, and this is something I think everyone should listen to. Everyone needs to know, one, how to pick out a good agency, but two, how do you have success with them? How do you work with them? You know, I think you can give us some great tips on that. So give us a quick background. You know, what have you done? What got you into SEO? And what are some projects you've worked on?
Yeah, sure. So I started in SEO as a writer, as a lot of SEOs do. Back in college, I started getting my first articles published on the internet. And the companies were like, hey, this is doing so great. We're getting so many Facebook shares. We're getting so much traffic. This is, thanks for writing this content. And I was like, Mom, I wrote this content. She's like, but I can't find it on Google. Why not? And that's what started my SEO journey. I started, learning from my own content, my own websites that I was building and experimenting with, a lot of YouTube content, how to get that stuff visible online. And I started learning some SEO and integrating that into my freelance work as I grew, eventually became an SEO consultant, started working at enterprise agencies, and now with a lot of different clients, mostly small, medium-sized businesses. But I've also worked at the enterprise level for about 5 years now. And boy, is it a different world between the two. But I've learned a lot from playing both sides there.
Yeah. So what are some of the typical models for SEO agencies, and how could these align with different types of clients?
I would say that the most typical models that I've seen are models where they promise ranking according to some sort of SEO tool. Like, you're going to rank for certain keywords, and if we get your website to rank for these keywords, then that's what success looks like. And they kind of a lot of times they'll have like a year-long contract for like the larger companies. Smaller companies, smaller agencies, smaller businesses might do like a month to month. And then as part of that contract, they have certain points where either monthly, quarterly, they'll do an SEO audit. They'll look at what kind of keywords is your website ranking for? What kind of keywords are your competitors ranking for? How do we close any kind of gaps between what you're ranking for versus what your competitors are ranking for? And, they give you a lot of insights as to what other kind of keywords could you create new content around or improve your existing content to improve your rank. It's all kind of focused around rank. There are some agencies that do more of a holistic sales funnel building approach that I've only met them recently, and I think they're really great. Those might look a little bit more like, hey, we want to target X amount of revenue this quarter, X amount of revenue this month. And those projects might just be specific to SEO. They might also be integrated with a paid search, social media. And that's more along the lines of the kind of services that I've come to offer.
All right. So you got two models based on what kind of results you're expecting, either a ranking result or some kind of revenue result. Yeah. Obviously, the revenue results, not as common out there. What are the benefits that someone might see from a revenue result versus a ranking result?
That's a really great question. I wondered that for a long time too. I think for a lot of companies, especially the bigger you get, it comes down to your KPIs. So with SEO, it's kind of treated like print marketing in the sense that you don't necessarily have attribution, meaning that you don't know, did this article that we wrote that we optimized for XYZ keywords, did this lead to a sale? So it's hard to justify budget spend on SEO the way it is for like paid search, where it's like we spent X number of dollars on these ads. We know exactly how many clicks they got, who converted based on these ads. And so ranking if in the model of SEO where you do attach revenue to it, ranking is a step towards it. And so you say, if we rank for the top 3 for this keyword, you're estimated to get a portion of traffic based on how much traffic's estimated to be out there. And then based on your rank, you can estimate a revenue goal based on that. And so a lot of agencies will just kind of simplify that and say, we just want to improve your rank. Because if you have a large enterprise, the way that the companies are often structured and siloed is that SEO is its own department, SEM or paid search is its own department, social media is its own department. And so in order to make it easier for companies to hit the KPIs, I've seen a lot of agencies build their entire business model around, hey, we're going to help you every quarter. We're going to give you these reports that you can then send up the chain of command. It's going to make you look good, that you hit your KPIs. And then nobody really worries about holistically, is the business getting a lot of ROI from this? Because it's kind of like a situation, if you're a stakeholder at enterprise, then you're kind of like, all right, I have this budget, I have to use it on something and I have to justify it. So how are we justifying it? Even if we can't show direct sales, we just want to show impressions. We want to show moving the needle. And in my experience, that goes a long way, but for small businesses as well sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, you touched on this a little bit, but what are some of the other frustrations? And I could add to this. What are some of the common frustrations that people have with SEO agencies and working with them?
Definitely the small businesses, it's the lack of ROI. They say, oh, this is so great that we're ranking, but how do we know that we're reaching the right people? I think that's exactly the right question to ask. Larger businesses, I haven't seen them complain too much about that. What I have seen is a lot of frustration around this SEO agency is producing generic content. They don't understand our tone of voice. They can't produce content that we can push through regulatory. Because I've written for every kind of regulatory, from healthcare, nutrition, life insurance, banks, credit cards, everything. The common denominator I always ran into, especially when I was working at an agency full time, is like, hey, we need this content to get through regulatory as quickly as possible. But then the SEO agency would say, well, you need to rank for these keywords. And if you're not going to rank for these keywords, you're not going to get anywhere. And so there was always that. I've seen that battle internally at some organizations too, like with the internal team saying the same sort of thing. And I'd say that like the remedy for that is focusing on content. Like if you have a style guide, if an agency is able to editorialize just enough so that you can tell your writers like, hey, this is the kind of language that we want to avoid. This is the kind of way we want to present things. Like if you're in pharma, you can't say our drug is going to cure X or our drug is going to give you XYZ side effects. You might say like you may experience XYZ outcome. So things like that can be a great tool for agencies to implement to, especially at the enterprise level, to kind of showcase how they can adapt to someone's tone of voice or their industry. Because I haven't really seen people too concerned about sales, especially the larger of a company you get. And I think one big reason for that also is that if your organization, like say Coca-Cola, you got it every store out there. You don't necessarily want to prioritize your D2C as Coca-Cola, because then what is Walmart going to say? What is Amazon going to say? What are all these retailers going to say if you're only prioritizing your own direct-to-consumer channel? So that's another reason why larger companies they want to see that visibility and they want to see the needle moving for their KPIs.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you've touched upon a point that is why a lot of smaller and mid-sized companies have a problem with the first model you discussed with SEO agencies of ranking as being the metric, because, a larger company is more concerned about brand advertising.
Yeah.
We simply want to get our name out there, stay top of mind. That has a value in and of itself. It's very difficult to quantify, but they know it's there. And they have the money to be able to do that kind of advertising. Whereas most small and mid-sized companies are more looking for a direct line between spend and results and revenue. And so if they can't put that line between them, like you said, it's frustrating for them. So they're not as interested in brand advertising. They want direct conversions, whether that's sales or whether that's leads, whatever the particular model may be. I know I've worked with a number of agencies myself personally over the years, and I've seen different styles of working with SEO. But one of the biggest frustrations to me, and I think this partly might be just simply the way SEOs tend to structure themselves as an agency, is they tend to be very good about understanding how to get traffic to a site, but they tend to forget the whole other side, which is like, what does that traffic do once it's on the site? Whereas a paid search. Paid search definitely takes as part of its job, not only getting them to the site, making sure they convert. Because if they don't convert, not a direct line to that cost, and why do we spend? But a lot of SEO agencies, they simply think, well, that's CRO, that's another division, or that's brand, that's another division, or that's content, that's another division. And in truth, they're right, but I think that there could be such better results if they either brought that in-house or found ways to work better with those sides, because there becomes very much this disconnect. I'll give you a real-world example. I worked with an SEO agency that was able to hit its goal of producing more traffic. Our traffic had a big jump. It was great. Everyone was excited about it. But as the months went on, we found that while our traffic was up, our conversions were actually going down. And so we talked about this with the agency, and they just said, well, it could be this, could be that, but they really didn't want to take ownership for it at all or offer strategic solutions like, hey, here's what we might do from SEO to try to address the conversion side. So I don't know if you have any comments about stuff like that.
I hear that 90%. Yeah, most clients that come to me with that exact story. It's like, we're getting all this traffic and then the conversions are going down. And theoretically, it's harder to increase your conversion rate if your impressions are going up. But I see that a lot because I think that people are not thinking about search intent with the content. They're just kind of going for traffic. They're going for that visibility. And the reason why that's so detrimental to your SEO overall is that if you're attracting the wrong people, they're not engaging with your content, then the algorithms start to notice that your content's not hot. I see this on my eBay store all the time. If I get the wrong people looking at it and then they click off, they bounce off, your bounce rate's really high, all of a sudden my ranking is just going to plummet because the algorithms always want to present relevant content. And that's what Google keeps saying, like put out useful content. But because the KPIs are just about visibility, then, an SEO agency could theoretically put that ad out to a click farm. They could put it out to, put it in Times Square and it's a local ad for California. They could do all sorts of things.
So do you think that conversions could be something that an SEO agency or that some SEO agencies out there would take on as one of their KPIs?
I've rarely ever seen that happen. And there's a number of, I've asked that question my entire career. And what I've found is that it comes down to attribution. Like if your SEO is acting as a silo, if your agency is only providing SEO services, then, how are you going to measure conversions? Like you could do CTR, like click-through rate, how many clicks, but then you have the same problem. Okay, somebody clicked on my article, but are they actually interested in my brand? Are they actually going to sign up? It's difficult to track that kind of stuff on a platform like Google because depending on what browser somebody's using, depending on all these different factors can make it difficult on Google the way you could on like Amazon, for example, or some kind of platform where somebody has an account and they use their account to engage, like on eBay, for example. You need an account to make purchases. And so that provides you certain data and certain cookies you can't kind of avoid the same way you can as a user from Google to another website. So I think that like the way to optimize for conversions is to either sync up your SEO agency with existing operations or departments, like for example, email, social, or especially paid search, and kind of look at holistically, like, hey, if your marketing budget is like $100,000 and you're going to spend $50,000 on paid search and $50,000 on organic, then next year, where whatever milestone we reach, let's start reducing your ad spend and keep your SEO spend the same, because that organic apparently is theoretically going to help you reach the same sort of ranking efforts or the same sort of traffic gaining efforts without spending so much on it. I've seen that model work a lot better in terms of something that's actually kind of benefiting the business. And as far as like straight up conversions, some industries, like especially with e-commerce, Amazon SEO, absolutely, that's built into a lot of the programs. But if it's just talking about general visibility, I don't know if it's possible with the data kind of laws that we have. And, it is very difficult to optimize for conversions. But I do think that SEO is an integral part of a holistic marketing strategy. And if you just kind of offer impressions as their own thing, that's not worth as much as integrating it into a larger picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, SEO agencies are real good at helping you, think of content clusters, which is the view of, a Google bot at your site, but not as good at telling you, all right, here's how this piece of content that's going to drive in traffic is going to fit into the whole journey, and, where you might want to plug in other pieces of content to complete that journey. But I think there's certainly an opportunity there. But let's talk now about how do you work well with an agency? Let's say you pick an agency, you're working with them. How can you make sure it's productive, it's results oriented, and it works?
That's a really great question. I think it depends on what kind of business you are, what your goals are, and how you want the agency to work for you. What I've seen a lot, especially small businesses and even large businesses too, actually, is they just kind of say, hey, we know nothing about SEO, agency, take the wheel, drive our strategy, and you can feel free to grade yourselves. Use your own tools to measure this and give yourselves a good grade every time. And that's a lot of agencies. I think that,
it's a lot of clients.
Yeah.
They're like, I don't know how to do that stuff. You guys just pass me a report. And yeah.
Exactly. And then the expectations, like the guarantees from the agency, even in those situations, is we're going to get you to rank. And look at us, we made you rank. I think that for a lot of enterprises, it's really great to use an agency as a resource that you say, hey, we're going to do this campaign of 100 articles. We're going to try to rank for these types of, content clusters based on our marketing objectives. And we want you to execute them in both because, our in-house team of 3 copywriters can't write 300 articles, but you guys can. So, and then we want you to help us monitor these results. I think those are, in my experience, that's what enterprises love to and really benefit from. But it starts with the client side, having that objective in mind. It's like, hey, I want to work with an agency because I want to gain more visibility. And maybe it's, I want to work with an agency because I don't feel like creating my Google My Business profile and getting my website indexed on Google. That's a big thing for especially the little guys that I'm realizing like, oh, like they don't need a blog, but they do need the GMB. They do need some very basic SEO. And I think that, if a small business gets stars in their eyes about, oh, I'm going to be famous because this SEO agency is going to build my blog or my YouTube channel, you're in for a lot of disappointment, because unless you're, the only person in your niche in your locality, there's going to be somebody or some kind of publishing organization that's bigger, more relevant, and they're always going to outrank you. And that's starting to apply more and more to even the biggest companies, because, a lot of, let's say, healthcare companies want to rank for certain symptoms of diseases that their medicines can cure. Well, Google's not necessarily going to prioritize a commercial entity. They want to prioritize a neutral, factual entity so that the most relevant informational content is coming from an unbiased source. And I've seen a lot of brands kind of scratching their heads like, well, why can't we outrank this doctor's office? And it's like, well, you're not a doctor, So that's another big thing that's, agencies tend to name anything that ranks as a competitor. And I think that one of the most important things is that the agency has to listen to, where are you in your industry? Where are you in your business? Like, what kind of goals do you have? Like, a lot of agencies are just crank up the visibility. That's all they can know how to do. But, if you're already at the number one spot, you don't really need to maintain your visibility in certain areas so much as you need to find those niche pockets on Reddit that people are talking about and offer a community, offer ways to, get in those little niche areas. It's not just about ranking. It's about really curating an audience, I think. And a lot of agencies don't really focus on that either. And to answer your conversion question from earlier too, I think audience is the best way to measure that, whether it's with a rewards program, a sign-up program, or just, click here to, use this discount code that you only find in the blog to apply to your next order. Could be another way to really, really measure it.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. You talked about two different types of agencies. One that was kind of focused on execution of actions to just drive visibility, and another that might, help with strategic questions like, what keyword should we go after? And is this a good fit, this type of traffic for our industry?
Right.
How do you, as a person who might hire an agency, determine which of those is a better fit for you? And, how do you identify them? Because they don't usually, everyone says they can do everything typically.
Yeah. I would say that the simplest terms, the thing I would look out for would be, are they naming search competitors or are they naming business competitors? That's the simplest thing that I think in my experience, an agency would be able to tell you. If they, like if I'm Petco and they give me a bunch of veterinary offices and they say, those are my competitors, then I'm not going to work with that agency because my competitors are other pet food suppliers. I think that's the most common thing I see, the biggest red flag. The other thing, if they really, really, are worth their salt, I would look for indicators of, hey, this is how this fits in with your paid search strategy. This is how this content can be shared on social. We're going to build you content or videos, for example, so that you have shorts. If somebody's making a podcast, for example, I would want them to, the master file that's just going to go on your Spotify or whatever. I want to see some teaser content that's going to go on YouTube Shorts. I want to see some Instagram content that's the right aspect ratio, everything. Some agencies only just give you whatever's going to help rank and nothing else. And I feel like that can be detrimental to a lot of businesses because you're only focusing on one thing, where a business is a living organism and you can't just, make sure your heart's beating at the expense of your lungs, then it's going to fall apart. It's not necessarily that drastic with SEO, but I think that an agency that thinks holistically and thinks in terms of this is going to be great content that we can editorialize a little bit at the expense of a little bit of rank here, because we know that this content is really going to have an impact on the users who are going to be loyal to this brand, if that makes sense. Look for all those things and more, but those are the simplest.
Okay. So as far as picking out an agency, you gave a couple of things to look for when you're talking to them. What are realistic expectations to have when you engage with an agency, as far as what you do, what they're going to do, how long it takes to get to results? What do you think on that?
Well, that's a really good question. I would say that, a lot of agencies are definitely going to be willing to do anything and everything for you. Like if you ask them to add an extra image here and change the language there, you're going to, expect to get really good service. I would say that when it comes to the service of deliverables, that's where you can kind of expect a lot out of an agency. A lot of them really do hustle, no matter how big or small they are. When it comes to results, I think that depends. So a lot of agencies tell you, oh, it takes everyone 6 to 9 months to see ranking results on Google. And that's not true. It depends where you are and what kind of industry you're competing in. So like back in the day, it would have been easy for anyone to get instant SEO results just by using the same keyword over and over again all over the page. Nowadays, the landscape has changed not only in terms of how the algorithm works, but how the industry is competing over certain keywords. So and it also depends on, how big of an audience are we going after? How engaged are they? And in my experience, if you're a small business that's just launching, let's say like a dental practice, and there's not a lot of dentists in your area and people are really interested in dental care, and then you get like 100 people to click on your website and engage with your landing page, you're going to start seeing results very, very quickly. I started seeing results on some of my website projects extremely quickly just because I was hyper targeting niche things. Like for my name, for example, I instantly ranked first for my name, Jason Hewett. There's other Jason Hewetts out there, but I bought a domain with my name years ago before I knew a lot of stuff about SEO, and I instantly outranked them. And I was able to maintain that for a while without even publishing blog content. It was just by having, certain key SEO indicators, created correctly. Yeah. And eventually, as there's more Jason Hewitts that were like criminals or rugby players, something like that came out there, those articles get more attention to my website. So Google's like, well, who is the real Jason Hewett? Could there be more than one? They don't really think about that as much. But like, I think that, I wouldn't look at an agency to tell you like, oh, we're going to get you rankings tomorrow, because that's not realistic. If they tell you it depends and they give you a specific scenario, it's like, hey, based on your industry and where you are right now, we're estimating that we're going to be able to improve your rankings on XYZ keywords to hopefully target XYZ traffic, if that makes sense. That's how I kind of would target things. I wouldn't say there's a universal time frame for any SEO, because especially nowadays, Google's updating its algorithm like crazy. AI is a big thing. Yeah, like there's a lot of testing going on. And that's why I don't really think that rank is the important KPI for any business success. I think that it's more about, hey, here's where we are right now in terms of traffic, in terms of revenue, in terms of where we want to go. So come up with a plan to help us move towards that. And if our goal is to expand awareness and visibility, great. Let's just pump out as much content as we can. And I wouldn't say that there's a universal time for creating the content. Yes, you can expect to have that published. I mean, if it's not a regulated industry, within a couple of weeks. If you have a lot of internal dependencies is what actually takes the time for publication. But agencies can move very quickly. Legal departments don't always. So that's kind of, some companies say like a month for an enterprise is fast for end-to-end content creation and publication. So I hate to give a vague answer like that, but it really does depend. I think everyone has to kind of work with an agency who's able to say, hey, based on where you are in your industry, this is what we can expect to go after.
No, I would expect that it depends a lot on the technology too that's in there. I know as a headless CMS, we deal with production of content times, and a lot of people just simply from switching to a different CMS can change the time it takes them to publish content from months or weeks into hours and minutes. So a lot of it's going to depend on those kind of factors in there, and whether it's possible for your SEO agency even to get into your code. Maybe they can't get in there. They have to hand it off to you, and then your team takes a long time, or legal, to approve it. So those are understood. As far as people are probably now asking the question, Jason, where do I go to find a good agency that's a match for me? Especially you talked about these ones that are revenue focused. Maybe a lot of our listeners haven't heard of that before. Where do they find that? Do they go to Crunchbase? Do they go to Google? What's the tip for them to find the right agency?
Another great question. I would say LinkedIn is number one for me. That's just what I know best. LinkedIn and probably conferences. Like any savvy agency or freelancer is going to be at an industry conference of sorts, and they're going to know your industry. You know what I mean? I would say that if you're looking for an SEO agency on Google, thinking whoever ranks first must be the one that's the best, that's not a bad mindset, but it's also not necessarily true, because you can bid your way to the top. Anyone can do that. So I would say, referrals, the classic business, recommendations for finding agencies, like leveraging your network if you can. And then like, if you are a small business and you're very niche, I would say look for agencies that work, in that niche, either for your competitors or a similar sized business. Freelancers can be a great referral. But I would also say that a lot of the best agencies have very active people on LinkedIn. They have podcasts. They have influencers who speak at different conferences. Like, for example, Brighton SEO in the UK is a big one. Here in the US, there's tons of conferences. I would say just look on LinkedIn for somebody who's active, who has a good following, puts out content that resonates with you. Like, there's a lot of people, including myself, who just post SEO tips, and there's the SEOs and the SEO agencies who are definitely focused on hacking the algorithm and trying to showcase how well they can do that. And then there's other guys, like, shout out to Matthew Proctor. I really enjoy his content. He's one of the agency leaders who has a revenue-based model. And he's somebody that I've definitely engaged with a lot on LinkedIn, learned a lot from on LinkedIn. I would say just look for people like that who post interesting things. Or me. Yeah, I do too.
Well, all right, let's say one of our listeners connects with Matthew Proctor or with you or another agency. They start working together. How can they ensure they have good communications and that they're really getting the most out of that connection with their agency?
That's a good question. I think it depends on what do you want out of the agency. Like, for a small business, I think the main thing is like milestones. Like, an agency that sets out a plan. Like, this is something that I do. I say, if I'm building a website for somebody, I say, hey, we want to have your website approved by this date. We want to have it launched by this date. We want to have Google My Business indexed by this date. And then we want to start posting content so that you can get on a cadence. And that usually applies to like a smaller business. A larger enterprise business is probably going to look for something more along the lines of a contract that makes sense for them, a number of deliverables that make sense for them, a number of reports, and then also flexibility. I think for larger companies, they're going to want to see, is the agency, if they are, do you have extra billable hours that you can purchase for ad hoc requests if your team operates that way? It's very inefficient to work that way on both sides, but with a larger company, it's usually the nature of the beast that you need to have extra flexibility for ad hoc requests. For a freelancer like me, ad hoc requests might come at a steep cost, but that's why I stay organized. So, that way it's more efficient. Like, I work efficiently, the agency gets efficient results from working with somebody like me. But if you just have somebody that's like, yeah, we're going to monitor your SEO every month and it's a monthly flat rate for monitoring services, I would say don't go with them, because what they're doing is they're probably just going to pull a report from SEMrush and give that to you. You're just going to present that to you for $2,500, $30,000 a month. And that's not really looking at your holistic content strategy. That's not actually, doing anything to improve your content, your tone of voice and things like that. Another thing that, as far as like looking for SEO writers and copywriters that know SEO best practice, like, look for people who ask questions as well about your industry. Look for somebody who's going to get to know your industry, get to know your brand, your limitations, what your values are, your core value proposition is. Even if they can't sense that intuitively right off the bat, somebody who's going to get to know those things is going to be somebody that is going to get to know your brand. There's a lot of agencies that are dedicated to just throwing bodies at things. They're dedicated to work theater. So if that's something that's important to you, I'd say everyone's got that, but the agencies that are actually going to help you are going to ask the hard questions. They're not going to be yes men and women. They're going to be people who ask you difficult questions about, well, what is your business really offering? That kind of stuff. They're going to be people who work with buyer personas. I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but this is just kind of, broad scoping it, yeah.
So next question I'd say is, all right, there's going to be a different experience if you're finding an agency for a startup versus an established enterprise. Mm-hmm. So what is that difference that you should be looking for as for a startup agency for SEO versus an enterprise?
I think that, there are agencies who work with enterprises, and those are huge. They're global. The ones that work with startups in particular are probably startups themselves. So I would say it depends on their business model. A startup agency is, you're going to want probably more full service, even if you are a startup. I mean, the thing is too, like, a lot of startups don't need SEO. That's the bottom line. Like, if you're on Amazon, if you're on e-commerce, yeah, you need SEO always. But if you're just starting out, the only thing you really need is kind of somebody to help you get indexed, at least to start with, because otherwise, like, I've worked with a lot of clients. They're like, oh, I can't get anywhere until I build this email list. And I'm like, well, you have capacity for like 5 clients. Like, why do you need an email list of 1,000 people when you just need to go out there and pitch to 5 people and get your business rolling that way? Or if you're a local business in my home state of Delaware, which is a really small population, why do you need an email list of everybody in Delaware when you have a town of like 20,000 people and you just need to reach anyone who passes through. You know what I mean? So I think that startup agencies would kind of offer more niche packages, more based on like tasks and milestones that a small startup would want to reach. Whereas an enterprise client, you want to have availability. You want to have somebody who has a dedicated development team that's dedicated to your account. You want people you want to have a set number of deliverables, I would say, in your SOW, and you want to have some flexibility. You want to have some kind of outline, like terms of like, if we have more questions, if we have a follow-ups, if we have an ASO question or App Store optimization question, which isn't, typical of like Google. How does the agency address those things with you? And also a big green flag for me would be style guides. Does the agency work with style guides, buyer personas? Do they create their own, or are they willing to listen to yours? And are they able to educate whatever in-house or likely freelance writers that they're bringing on? I would also say that a lot of people talk about turnover in agencies, and that's another big thing, like especially for enterprises. If you are working with an agency that has a lot of turnover, then that means it's going to be difficult for you to be in constant communication about certain deliverables with them. Even if you have a really great account manager, having been an account manager, it's tough if you have a constantly rotating team. So like organization is a really big part of it too.
Yeah. One last question. You mentioned the revenue model as opposed to the standard rankings model early on in our discussion. And I want to know, is that something that only is going to fit like an enterprise level SEO, or is that something that could be applied to mid-level or startups?
Oh, it's definitely applicable to everybody. I would say more so to mid-level and startups, because a lot of times mid-levels and startups don't have the kind of segmentation that an enterprise does, in the sense that your SEO department has KPIs for visibility, and then maybe your paid search department has KPIs for conversions, and then those are going to conflict sometimes, because if your SEOs are bringing in too much irrelevant traffic, then that's going to drive down conversions for paid search. And if paid search is, ramping up conversions and they're trying to hyper focus their reach, then that's going to drive down impressions and visibility for SEO. Whereas a smaller business or startup doesn't necessarily have to contend with that kind of siloing. They just kind of have a universal revenue goal that they want to hit. But holistically speaking, like I think any business would benefit from a revenue model, in the sense that if I'm working with Coca-Cola and they say like, hey, we just launched this new beverage and we're trying to market it to people that live on the beach, then, I would say, okay, great. So let's look at what are the major cities like Miami, north to south, like Cape Cod, like wherever, find those beach town communities. And, let's focus our efforts. Like, what are people in those areas searching for? You know what I mean? I would get that granular even with an enterprise, so that we can focus on achieving that goal for them. And the goals might be different. An enterprise might have a campaign on the beach, whereas a startup, like their entire business model is the beach, or their entire business model is something more niche. And so that's where you start to see similarities in terms of like, the startup has one of these types of goals, and the enterprise might have a beach campaign, and they might have a, people that are ski resorts campaign or whatever. And then there's just multiple campaigns that an enterprise has to get multiple stakeholders to all think strategically about. But because they're set up with KPIs, that it doesn't necessarily get their stakeholders to think strategically. It gets people to think about, how can I advance my career in a time frame that's shorter than it takes SEO results to really resonate. You know what I mean? So that's another big unfortunate reality of working in a larger company. But anybody would holistically benefit from that revenue model for sure.
Very interesting things that you share with us today, Jason. I hadn't heard some of those, as you gave me some deeper insights into some other things. I always ask this of each of my guests. I try to get an understanding of what they've learned over their career. If you could go back in a time machine, meet yourself at the very beginning of your career, what have you learned now that you'd tell yourself then?
Oh man, so much. When I started, I wanted to work in like entertainment, and I wanted to work as a novelist or write that kind of writer. And the thing I struggled with the most was like, how do I get people to be interested in what I'm writing? And I would just I would pass out newspaper articles to the dorms in college, and like hoping that enough people would see it and read it. And what I realize now is that I was barking up the wrong tree. Like I took that visibility mass marketing approach, and I was like a small business at the time, pretty much. What I should have been doing is find your community, market to that community from the get-go. And that's kind of what I'm doing now. That's why I found more success like on LinkedIn, just posting SEO tip of the day. I don't SEO my website because I have enough capacity that comes to me from LinkedIn that I don't need a mass market approach of SEO for my website. I don't need to be a thought leader on the internet. I can just be, a thought leader on LinkedIn, and that'll get me what I need. So I would say like focus on not just being as big as you can be. That's, put some more parameters around that. And that would influence a lot of my marketing decisions and probably save me a lot of time and effort on a lot of things I've had to learn the hard ways strategically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, focus in, niche up.
Yeah.
Good advice. All right, well, you mentioned you do SEO tips of the day. How can people connect with you online? Tell us a little bit about kind of your consultancy and who it's good for. Who's your niche?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. So best place to find me is definitely on LinkedIn. I'm Jason Hewett on LinkedIn. If you Google Jason Hewett, Hewett, LinkedIn, you should be able to find my profile come right up, and then likely also my website. My website is jasonhewett.com. Right now, I am focusing on just doing consulting sessions for any size business, but my experience is definitely based on like small, medium-sized businesses, startups, anyone who's just trying to get started with SEO, email marketing, social media. But definitely the best place to find my content right now is LinkedIn. On my website, you can book different classes. Like I'm doing a comedy workshop coming up soon where I'll be teaching brands how to write with humor based on my experience as a New York City comedian and working with other
SEO
comics.
who can write with humor?
Oh, yeah.
Amazing. I love it. There you go. If you want humor in your SEO, reach out to Jason Hewett. I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely find me on LinkedIn. That's the best way.
Yeah. No, that's good to know. I mean, because I think with so much AI out there right now, AI cannot do humor. And you need that kind of personal touch to your subjects, to your content. And that's another thing I think a lot of SEO agencies they don't get that side. And that's why it's so hard to get a brand voice, because that's the human side of things. And it's just getting harder with AI. So I think it's going to be a real differentiating factor in the future. Those brands that are able to successfully work their human side into their AI content, or at least show it so people can see that this is something that I can resonate with as a human, as well as learn from intellectually. I got the answer to my question.
Definitely. Yeah, you're going to need those human skills. Even if AI can be funny, it's not going to be topical. You know what I mean? So you're absolutely right about that.
Jason, great episode. Thank you so much for all the tips and the ideas there. And people go out and find him, Jason Hewett on LinkedIn. Thank you so much.
Cutting Edge Web Content Development is brought to you by Butter CMS. To find out how you can build better with Butter, stop wasting dev time, and free your marketers from your legacy CMS, visit buttercms.com. Also, make sure to search for Cutting Edge Web Content Development in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Butter CMS, thank you for listening.